Welcome to the Recovery Residence Manager training. This video will cover the manager role, curriculum, and certification here in Texas. Recovery Residence Managers are the primary direct care staff and/or leadership role in most types of recovery residences. They can go by lots of different names. Most oftentimes they're called the house manager, but they can also be called the senior resident, peer leaders, peer mentors. But for the context of this training, we'll refer to them as residence managers or recovery residence managers. Their responsibilities can really range based on the level of support or type of recovery residence that they're working in, and really the division of labor within that particular recovery residence. And corresponding to that, the compensation can really range. It may be a salary to free rent, and in some cases, it's considered a peer leadership opportunity. A manager is key to the success of a recovery residence. The recovery residence manager skills, knowledge, and abilities greatly impact the household's health and recovery culture. Oftentimes, they say that the health and recovery of a home is reflective of the health and recovery of the manager themselves. From an owner-operator standpoint, they're very aware that a manager can impact the turnover and occupancy rates of the home, as well as their behavior really impact risk and liability. Altogether, this means that the manager has a huge impact on sustainability and profitability. More importantly, the house manager skills can really support or undermine the recovery of the residents within the home. All this means that we need to look at it from a comprehensive workforce development perspective. Recovery residences are much more likely to meet or maintain best practices and achieve or maintain sustainability if there is formalized resident manager training and ongoing resident manager support. It's support in their skill set, cultivating the skill set, and support in the individuals or the manager's recovery because they're in recovery themselves. And even beyond that, we need to look at what is the succession plan. Just because you have a really good recovery house manager today doesn't mean that they don't move on with life as we would want them to. But how do we prevent gaps in leadership and by developing a succession plan through workforce development? All this in the backdrop of growing demands. Today, the demands on resident managers is much higher because, quite frankly, the residents' needs are much higher. Oftentimes, we point to transitional age youth, which is kind of late teens, early adulthood, 16 to 26. Sometimes these individuals may look like adults or young adults, but developmentally, their brains are still growing. The way that we would support someone in this transitional age youth point of their life is much different than we would support them if they were an older adult. In addition to that, we've seen the rise in synthetics. Today, there are over 300 synthetics that are out there that are not picked up by most point of care cups, much less that we don't have a breathalyzer for them. So resident managers are having to be much more aware of signs and symptoms that would indicate whether one of the residents is abusing a synthetic to get around the cups. Also, we have this opiate epidemic going across the United States. Resident managers need to be prepared and recognize the signs of overdose, as well as if they do find someone who is overdosing, how can they appropriately administer naloxone while EMS is coming in order to save the individual. And then, we have more and more individuals that are choosing medication-assisted treatment as a part of their approach to recovery. This looks like Suboxone or even methadone. And while not all recovery residences accept individuals on MAT or can have the right type of support and staff that can support someone who's on Suboxone and methadone, there are more and more residences that are. So how do we train managers to be able to support an individual who's on Suboxone and or methadone? On top of that, we see a growing number of individuals who have pretty intense disease severity and disease complexity. Maybe they're moving in with multiple co-occurring issues. And including process disorders, mental health and process disorders. When I say process disorders, I'm talking about gambling addiction, sexual addiction or compulsivity, eating disorders, and then this kind of underlying current of trauma. We're really understanding that trauma can definitely impact or be kind of the impetus of a lot of mental health and substance use issues. So, as a resident manager, how are they able to support individuals who are being impacted by or having a traumatic response? How can the resident manager be more trauma informed? By and large, there's been this lack of formal training or a lack of access to formal training for recovery residences. Too often resident managers are thrown into the role with little or no training or support. Oftentimes, they report that they did informal apprenticeship of sorts by observing their house manager while a resident and learning what to do, in a lot of cases, what not to do. And so these resident managers should be acknowledged for trying something, for doing the best that they can. But this is definitely not the way that we would want to systematically develop a workforce and improve quality capacity across the recovery residence industry. Because there hasn't been access to recovery resident manager training, oftentimes individuals are taking the wrong training and being placed in the wrong role. Resident managers who are trained as counselors or recovery coaches often report experiencing a scope of practice or role confusion. So if someone is a counselor and they're serving in that resident manager role, they may slip into a counselor role, which has consequences that could trigger licensure in most states. And although a resident manager and a recovery coach are both peer roles, someone that is focused just on being a recovery coach is not quite the same as being a resident manager, and it can oftentimes undermine the culture of a home if they're not aware of that. So, all being said, the resident manager role is unique and requires its own workforce development. And when I use this workforce development term, I'm talking about curriculum and credentials. And there's been a recovery resident manager training around. I mean, nationally, we can look to the Association of Halfway House Alcoholic Programs, or AHAP, which is the precursor to NAR. They developed a peer recovery specialist training and certification that was specific to recovery residences as far back as the early 1990s. So here in Texas, Trone and recovery people were able to win a HRSA grant to bring a training to Texas to start offering recovery residence manager training. So let's take a snapshot or a overview of the Texas curriculum and certification. It is adapted from national and other state affiliate curriculums and certifications. Texas is using a hybrid approach. It is a hybrid between in-person experiential retreat and online learning management system. This is getting the best of both worlds. It is giving people that experiential experience that our community oftentimes wants and can only learn in the face-to-face interaction. And then there's the cost effectiveness of an online learning management system that is educational and engaging. The community of practice is leveraging technology to keep people engaged over time as they go back into the field and implement some of the skills that they learned, some of the concepts they learned. People need to come back and be able to talk about it, share successes, share failures, do problem solving around that. And all that can be done in the context of a community of practice. So as you can see, there'll be a total of 60 hours of class delivered via classroom. When somebody completes those, they'll be designated as a recovery residence manager intern. And in addition to that, there is documenting 500 field experience hours. And once somebody does that, they'll be designated as a certified recovery residence manager. So probably the experiential retreat is what excites people the most. It is definitely a recovery camp. So if you would like to be a camp counselor, please contact us. We're always needing camp counselors for today and for the future. And if once you sign up for a particular retreat, you'll get information and details as far as the when, the what, the where, and much more granular detail. But we wanted to give you a snapshot of what a general schedule looks like. So the retreat will start in the afternoon, kind of late afternoon of a Friday. So individuals can work or travel on Friday, come into the retreat that late afternoon on Friday. It's all day Saturday, and then we'll be wrapping up right after lunch on Sunday, giving people time to travel and get back to their home. The online learning modules are broken down into 8 modules or 8 sessions. Each session includes pre-assignments as well as an interactive webinar. Pre-assignments are going to be watching videos, reading an article, or doing an exercise. So if you're watching this video, you're probably doing it as a pre-assignment for Module 1. Then there is the weekly interactive webinars. So this is just not logging into a webinar and listening, but it's very engaging. We'll have some great speakers and panelists, and also get soliciting input from everybody, including you that log into the webinar. At the end, we'll ask you to do a quiz, and really, it's really heavily weighted towards an evaluation. We want to see how well you liked the material, how well did you understand the material, and did we meet the objectives. Our goal is to continue to improve this training curriculum, and the only way that we can do that is from input from you. I've also wanted to give a shout out to T3. T3 stands for Think, Teach, and Transform. T3 is our technology partner. If you are logging on to the modules with your username and password, you're logging on to the T3 system. Community of practice is a fancy way of saying a group of people who share a craft and or a profession, like recovery residence managers. We'll be providing ongoing web conferences where resident managers can share successes, problem solve, reinforce skills, and gain support. It's when you go into the field and start using the skills and concepts of when the questions come up. And so we want to be able to bring folks back together on a regular basis, or create a formal opportunity for individuals to come back and talk about that. And it's great to share successes, but it's also great to share barriers, and that way that we can problem solve as a community. Eventually, this is looking to develop a statewide network of recovery residence managers and alumni who are passionate about advancing the role. Field experience is important. This is where individuals can embody the knowledge and skills. So for those of you who've not worked or lived in recovery residence, then we'll try to get you connected with a recovery residence where you can work, intern, or live, so that you can solidify the knowledge and skills. Again, if you've lived, or if you have past experience living or working in a recovery residence or a recovery home or even a recovery organization, that may count. We just need to work together to figure out how we can document those hours towards your 500. And we also understand that there may be individuals who live in parts of the state where there's not access to a recovery residence field placement. So we can work on a reasonable accommodation that would get you the opportunity to document the 500 field experience hours and really kind of solidify and practice the skill sets and the concepts. Also wanted to acknowledge our network partners. These are organizations that support the Recovery Residence Manager training. That may look like them offering field placement opportunities. That may look like them helping recruit students, as well as sponsoring and donating. This is important. The advisory committee. It is going to consist of at least 12 members, and it will consist of current or former residents, managers, providers, or stakeholders. The goal of the advisory committee is to shape the strategic planning around the curriculum and the strategic plan around recovery residences in Texas in general. So that is wraps up this particular video. Again, welcome to the Recovery Residence Manager training and welcome to the Recovery Residence Manager community in Texas.